My name is Mike Schonlaw. I'm the GIS administrator for Douglas County, Nebraska, which is city of Omaha, and want to talk here about our experience with 1-inch imagery and why we think there's a strong business case for upgrading. So a little bit about myself. I've been in the industry as a GIS professional for more than 25 years now, and one of the unique aspects of my time in the industry is I've spent a lot of time working with imagery and managing large-scale imagery projects. So acquisitions for multiple counties and cities over the last at least 15 years. And so I've had a lot of exposure to different imagery products and feel like I've got a pretty good wealth of information about imagery and how it can provide value. A little bit about Douglas County. It's Douglas County and the city of Omaha. We're the largest city and county in the state of Nebraska. About 500,000. The metro area is closer to 1 million. We're the second smallest county in Nebraska, 340 square miles roughly, but we do have a pretty good population center here. So most of our county is taken up with urban and suburban area. Another comment here is we first started using oblique imagery and contracted with pictometry back in 2010. So that was our first project and experience with pictometry, now EagleView. And they were a subcontractor on that project. So one important note on that is they provided, as kind of a bonus, they provided the ortho imagery as well as the obliques, even though we had already contracted with the lead contractor for orthos. And I'll come back to that in a little bit just to explain why that's important. But as many cities and counties, we have lots of different departments that use imagery on a daily basis. Really, a lot of decision making is made off of it. A lot of asset management is done off of imagery. A lot of feature extraction is now happening, so it's a very important product to what we're doing. So here's a little bit of a timeline on our imagery and our history. I mentioned that the first oblique imagery we did was back in 2010. Well, in that project, in addition to oblique imagery, our actual contract was for ortho imagery primarily, and the lead contractor provided 6-inch ortho imagery. But pictometry, as a subcontractor in that project, not only provided oblique imagery, but also provided a 6-inch ortho. That was taken probably about 2 weeks apart from the primary contractor's flight window. So we had 2 countywide ortho products to look at that year. And we immediately found that the pictometry orthos were of what we thought a higher quality. And even though they were both the same resolution, we felt like the pictometry orthos were crisper and really looked good. So we were excited about that. So that led to our next acquisition in 2013. And in that project, pictometry EagleView was the primary contractor there. And so we bumped it up to 4-inch acquisition, and as you'll see a theme here, every time we get better in resolution, our users get happier. So that's pretty consistent. And you can see in 2016 and 18, we made another small hop to 3-inch imagery, and things were really looking good. We were really impressed with the 3-inch imagery. Our users were thrilled. They could see a lot of details they once couldn't. Well, in 2020, we were approached by Pictometry EagleView about a new product that they had, which was 1-inch GSD or imagery. And of course, given our history, we were very interested. And so I made the rounds internally and said, I really think it would be worthwhile for us to at least try this imagery, see if we think it's worth the added cost. going from 3-inch to 1-inch is a noteworthy jump. And so I did get support to do that. So in 2020, we contracted with Pictometry EagleView to acquire our first 1-inch imagery. And I can tell you, after delivery of that product in the summer of 2020 and some internal processing and sharing, it was an immediate hit. I really tried to reach out to a lot of our departments and users to get some direct feedback on what did they think of the imagery in general, but more importantly, maybe how did they feel the 1-inch differed from the 3-inch. And I was really looking for some specific use cases. And pretty much across the board, across all our city and county departments, I only heard positive comments, a matter of fact, very positive comments about how much of a difference the 1-inch made over the 3-inch and how good the imagery was. And so in 2022, when it came time to work out the details for our next flight acquisition, there wasn't even a decision to make. We, again, contracted for 1-inch imagery, and that was delivered this last year. And the users here are absolutely thrilled with it. The slides I'm going to show you here are going to kind of get into specific use cases. And I want to be clear, too, that 3-inch imagery is a great product. I worked with much lower resolution than that many moons ago, and I was thrilled and really happy to have 3-inch imagery. You can see a lot of detail, but 1-inch really takes it to the next level. It's to a point where we can actually save money with people spending less time in the field. We can get more details, become more accurate, and I'll walk through that in some of these slides. One thing I do want to point out, and I've got a note at the bottom, all of our flights have included what's called the standard ortho product, not the AccuPlus product. And not to say the AccuPlus product isn't great. We did have a couple small flights, and that is a really good certified product. But I am kind of saying here the standard ortho has been very good. And EagleView has provided a accuracy specification for it, and we've provided, set targets out to measure its accuracy, and we've been very pleased with that product. So
excellent. So thinking back to 2020, when you're making the case internally to upgrade from 3-inch to 1-inch, what were those conversations like? Who did you have to influence to maybe allocate budget towards the upgrade? I think maybe some of our clients or prospective clients may struggle with those types of conversations and ability to influence or maybe illustrate the value of an upgrade like that for folks that control budget. Do you recall any of those conversations and maybe how you were able to be effective?
Yeah, I think for me, I didn't have to sell the employees and the technical folks, the GIS folks who used it, because there are people who use it every day and they could immediately see the benefits. Where I focused my efforts was in speaking with management and the people who had the kind of held the purse strings and were able to commit funding. And I really tried to make a real business case. And that's where I started to develop a few case studies of, an example of where 3-inch imagery might not have been sufficient to replace a field verification process. So example maybe is normally you'd have to send a worker out in a truck to verify equipment at an intersection. With 3-inch imagery, you just couldn't see the detail that you needed to. But with the 1-inch imagery, you could actually see that detail and potentially save a trip by a worker out to that intersection, which is, by itself isn't a huge cost savings, but when you extrapolate that out to field visits all throughout the year, many different intersections, you have staff time you're saving, you have fuel costs and maintenance costs in the vehicle, you have a safety issue, less time spent at busy intersections is safer.
Right.
for workers. So I really tried to approach each use case with a strong business case, and that was one example, kind of more in the public works area. But I also approached that the same way with our appraisal folks. And when our appraisal folks were able to see the 1-inch imagery and figure out that they could determine siding type and roof composition without having to go out in the field, it doesn't replace field visits, but what it does is it makes those field visits a little shorter. It gives them reinforcement for the information they are collecting in the field. And they're able to do a lot more accurately from the office. And so really tried to focus those business cases with management and the people who are spending the money. And when we looked at the actual upgrade cost, it wasn't a hard sell. I mean, the upgrade cost was not enormous. It was reasonable. And I think after having the products delivered, I think we can confidently say the upgrade paid for itself in a short amount of time.
Great, thanks. And yeah, this might seem intuitive, but once the imagery is procured, I know we're going to focus on GIS and public works here, but all departments throughout the county then have access to the imagery and can benefit from it in a variety of ways. So you gave an example of the assessment department using the 1-inch imagery, but every department within the county, and then I don't know if this is the way it works in Douglas County, but likely all the towns within the county could also get set up with that same imagery to use it for whatever purpose that they require as well, correct?
That's accurate, yeah. And it's so in our case, our city and county departments, all of our towns have access, our local planning agency. We even have public utilities here that have access. So it is a well-shared product and very usable. So we get a lot of mileage out of the imagery for sure.
Right on. All right, well, let's dive into some of those use cases that you mentioned.
All right, well, so the next set of slides is some tech specs. I won't spend a ton of time on here, but I do want to walk through it.
Yeah.
This is how we manage our imagery. The oblique imagery is all hosted by EagleView. We typically view that through the Connect Explorer website. We stopped having oblique libraries delivered in 2013. We just found that the online tools were superior, and we didn't want to take up disk space with those large deliveries. As far as the orthos go, we still have those delivered in individual tiles, and there is definitely some processing time, especially as you get into the higher resolution product like the 1-inch. But we manage all that and build all of our tiles locally. And then we also share that imagery with Esri and their community maps program. That's a really important point to make too, because what Esri does is they add those ortho images into their world imagery service, and that's what we use in most of our web applications, is that world imagery service. So basically anyone using the Esri world imagery service is going to be able to see our 1-inch imagery. And
That's cool.
really valuable. But we also build some tile caches locally for historical imagery purposes. And we do host most of our data now in the cloud, in the Amazon cloud, and it's very cost effective to do that, even though the 1-inch tiles are very large. In our case, it's about 5 terabytes. And we make a public download site available so that people can download image by image if they need them, contractors and consultants working with the city and county.
Cool. And can you spend a moment talking about maybe the benefits of Community Map? I saw on the previous slide.
Yeah, let me go back.
It said the raw tiles are uploaded to the Esri's Community Map. What benefits does that provide to users? Do they have access to just the imagery, or do they also have access to the data that's imbued in the imagery so that they could perform some type of analysis?
Yeah, so the raw tiles we provide, these are the ortho tiles that we provide to Esri. Esri processes them into tile caches and adds them to their world imagery service. So for the most part, they're used as reference imagery, where you're viewing the imagery as a base map with other layers on top of it. But the nice thing about that is it kind of takes care of a lot of the technical work that cities and counties would have to provide themselves. Esri does that for you and includes that imagery in their World Imagery service. And then you can pull that service into various web maps and applications for free, and it performs very well. So it's really a nice option. So you kind of couple that with using EagleView's Connect software, EagleView Cloud now, and that works really well. Then you don't have to spend too much time building your own tile caches and processing that imagery.
Gotcha.
So,
and then as far as sharing it with members of the Douglas County community, are you using Esri solutions to make local imagery available for certain things like just checking on property values or maybe garbage routes or something like that?
Yeah, so a lot of the applications my department builds or other departments in the city and county here will use that World Imagery service. And so all of those 1-inch orthos are available for whether it's our appraisal folks or it's our public works folks or public safety folks, planners. They're all able to access that imagery within their various applications, whether it's through that Esri community map or through the Connect Explorer.
Is there a way that you're making any of the imagery available to residents of the county?
Yeah, so same way we do to employees, we have a lot of public facing apps. We always have what we call our kitchen sink app, which is a publicly available, it's got 30, 40 different GIS layers on it, including the imagery, and any citizen can go on there and look at that imagery and look at their property line and look at the other assets near them, things like that. So it's always available to employees and, of course, to the public here.
Excellent. And so as the resolution of the imagery that's used as a base map for that data, it probably benefits the residents of the community who are seeing all those images in higher resolution as they're required.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the same as the benefit that the employees get. If I have a citizen who's looking at, let's just say they're looking at a fence line on their property, it's much easier to see those details with a 1-inch image than it is with a 3 or a 6-inch image, and it makes a lot of difference.
Great, thanks.
Yep. So a quick slide here on how we view our imagery. I mentioned Connect Explorer. That is our primary way we view the oblique images. Quite active here locally, especially with our appraisers. They are our biggest user. We also have GIS folks who access the imagery through an ArcGIS Pro extension. We have users who use the mobile EagleView app. And we also have an older extension for our GeoCortex applications. And I know I've been told by the tech folks at EagleView that an Experience Builder widget is on its way soon. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's funny too. I see the bullet point that says, "Where's the add-in for 3.8?"
Oh yes,
yeah. So for anyone watching this, we're recording this on July 26th. It'll hopefully be available by the time you watch this, sometime in August 2023. But yeah, I know when this was originally presented back in April, it was supposed to be right around the corner. Just had a little hiccup.
Well, it's important, I think, as a customer to provide this kind of feedback too to you folks, because you want to know what your customers are looking for and how we can make the imagery work even better for us. And that's tools like this are some of the ways we need to do that.
Oh yeah, I mean, our goal is to integrate effortlessly and seamlessly into your existing workflows. So any feedback like that would make it easier. That's what we're trying to do.
Right. So as far as the ortho imagery, I've mentioned already, we use a lot of internally, we use Mosaic data sets to view that imagery. Online, we'll use hosted tile services. I mentioned the Esri World Imagery service. We also host some ourselves, so we can use it in other applications like CityWorks, or through historical imagery where we want to look at each year of our imagery, maybe in a historical slider of sorts. We also have AutoCAD users, engineers who bring individual tiles into their AutoCAD drawings, and that's a big use. We don't use the mosaics as much as we once did because we've got, improving tools all the time with web services are really helping us kind of not have to use those mosaics like the Mr. Sid as much.
Yeah.
So a couple real quick specs about our project so you can get an idea of what it means to use to have 1 inch. Our 2020 delivery was kind of a learning experience for both us and the Pictometry Eagle View folks. And so those are the specs on screen here you see for the different ortho tiles we received. And a couple comments I had, or observations that I had, is that we kind of painted ourselves into a corner a bit because we left the tiles too small. And because they were so small, that produced a huge number of files to work with. And you can see those numbers. Also, the JPEGs was even though it's a smaller file size, it was not the optimal format for image resolution at 1 inch.
Okay.
And so we learned that processing nearly 500,000 files in the end was not very optimal. So we took that information and we kind of planned differently for our 2022 project. And you can see my observations here after making some changes. Even though the total size went up from 275 gigs to 4.1 terabytes, that was a small cost for the other benefits. The GeoTIFFs were a better format for these images. The tile size worked a lot better for our processing time. We didn't have to go through 500,000 tiles. We were only going through about 40,000 files. And again, we needed more storage, but storage is very cheap. And so we leveraged that, and we're pretty happy with those specs. And we'll probably use something very different for our next, or very similar for our next acquisition.
Very cool. Thanks.
Yeah, a few more details, and this is a good slide because it gives you some actual costs. So if you're, for us, I'm going to get an ortho delivery with this project. What are my costs going to be to store this much data, 1 inch imagery? We used to store this stuff on premise, and you can see that our costs were our costs for on-premise storage were much higher than storing it in the cloud. I'll tell you that. I don't have those listed here, but I did put the couple boxes at the bottom of the slide talk about what our actual costs are right now for storing this in the cloud. And we're an Amazon Web Services cloud user, and you can see we host our current set of orthos, which is our most recent acquisition. We call those our current orthos, and we have a different storage class for those because those are accessed very frequently.
Yeah.
$51 a month is what we pay to store 4.1 terabytes and serve those out. Every time we acquire a new countywide set of orthos, we'll move the previous ones to an archive set. And you can see the archive sets are very cheap. So our 4.1 terabyte delivery from 2022 will only cost us $4 a month to store an archive. So that's very inexpensive, and it's more reliable than having a bunch of hard drives sitting around the shelves in my office. So I know people have come to me about the 1 inch imagery and had storage questions, and this is really the slide that I point them to because I think you can do some pretty good cost management with your 1 inch delivery if you consider using cloud storage.
Gotcha. That's cheaper than YouTube TV, man.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of time it would spend me to walk across my office and get an old hard drive and plug it in and start moving data, I probably, paid for storing in the cloud already.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. It's a good reminder. EagleView has flexibility, right? We can deliver a hard drive, or we can deliver through the cloud. So it all depends on your preference, and we can accommodate that preference. But you're right, it does seem that there are certain advantages and efficiencies related to storing in the cloud.
Yeah, I wouldn't want the size of the 1-inch imagery to scare anyone away with storage. I mean, storage is cheap, and there's lots of options out there. So.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, now this is the biggest section of my presentation, which is the use cases, and I'll go through these. I tried to get a good cross section of use cases across city and county departments that hopefully everyone will find useful. But we'll kind of scroll through these. Starting with public works. And so most of these are going to be a comparison of a 3-inch ortho to a 1-inch ortho.
Okay.
This particular use case is a sewer manhole. And as you can see on the image on the left, you can't confidently say it's a sewer manhole, besides the fact that it is a circular object in the street. So it probably is a manhole. On the right-hand side, you can actually see the design of the manhole cover, which for the city they can tell right off of that it's a city manhole versus a utility manhole, say. But maybe even more important, you can see just to the right of the manhole in the image on the right, the inspector had made a note there, 15-inch VCP, vitreous clay pipe. So that's valuable. The inspector was able to write that, and the technician back in the office was actually able to attribute that manhole and the pipe connected to it with that material type. Very useful.
Yeah, impressive.
This next example is another manhole. Actually, this is more of an inlet. And you can see on the left-hand side, it's hard to tell what that is. It could easily be a tree trunk or a tree stump. But on the right-hand side of the 1-inch imagery, they're able to tell, okay, yes, this is one of our inlets. And this is how they improve their asset inventory. A lot of these types of manholes or inlets have been out in the field for many, many years, and the asset inventory may not be fully accurate. And when you can pick that kind of detail off of the 1-inch imagery right away, it really helps them improve those inventories.
Oh, sure.
Another sewer example, this is about exposed pipes. And in the left, obviously you can see the pipe, but it's fairly blurry. That's the 3-inch oblique. And in this case on the right, it's a 1-inch oblique. And you can see much more detail about the potential erosion near the pipe, under and around. You can even almost see some more of the pipe condition itself. So again, it's a noteworthy difference between 3-inch and 1-inch here.
Yeah, this example in particular is pretty dramatic.
Yeah, you can really see the clarity. More importantly, you can see the cool graffiti on the pipe.
Yeah, I'm sure whoever did that, if they're watching, is like, yeah, that was me.
Yep. This is a public works streets example where they're looking at pavement cracking and condition assessment. On the left, you can see some seams in the concrete. It's kind of hard to tell cracking or whether those for sure are seams. On the right-hand side, however, you can not only see the cracking, but you can see the extent of it. You can see more details about it. Essentially, you can provide a much more accurate condition assessment just from the image on the right than you can on the image on the left.
Absolutely.
Here's another public works example from our traffic division. This kind of is similar to what I was talking about earlier, where you're looking at traffic signal equipment on the corner of a busy intersection. And while you can see some of those things on the 3-inch oblique, in the 1-inch oblique, you can see them much more clearly, and you can see their condition. You can even see some details. I'm not fully zoomed in on the image on the right, but you can see some details about what those things are. And again, there's a lot of detail that you can see on the signal itself and the mast arm that you can't really see on the left-hand side. So, I'll point out one clear example. On the right-hand side, you can see there's a green street sign hanging right below the mast there, 90th Street.
Yeah.
If you look at the left, you can't even tell there's a sign there, let alone read it. So it's a good example of the clarity difference. Another traffic sign example, and this is again about reading signs. The example on the left, I can see that there's a street sign there. I can't really confirm if that's 25 miles an hour or 35 miles an hour. But on the image on the right, it's very easy to see that. And when you have hundreds of thousands of signs that you're inventorying, and knowing the speed limits that are in place on those roads, and you want to validate that the signs match that, being able to see this from imagery is a huge time saver. And so that's a good example of the 1 inch versus 3 inch. This is a design example. So our civil engineers that are designing intersections, and that gave me this example, is something that I didn't even realize they used. On the left-hand side in the 3 inch ortho, you can kind of see that there's something there, but you can't really tell where that circled area is. On the right-hand side, though, however, you can see clearly it's a manhole, but also you can see, based on the design of the manhole, they know that's a utility manhole. So that on the left-hand side would have been very easy to miss when they're doing their design work. You know, maybe they're designing a panel replacement for that road and don't realize that there's a utility manhole right there. On the right-hand side, it's definitely there. Again, it improves the accuracy of their design and their ability to coordinate with the utility on that project.
Sure, and would save any sort of rework that was required as a result of working off the 3 inch as opposed to the 1 inch.
Absolutely. Yeah, makes a big difference. Okay, now we've got some planning examples. This was an example provided to me by one of our transportation planners. He was working on a bike plan. And on the 3 inch ortho, it's difficult to see the actual curb and the roads. The 1 inch ortho, the curb is very well delineated there. And he was able to do what he thought was a much more accurate bike lane plan on that 1 inch imagery versus the 3 inch. So, whereas in the past they might have even gone out and photographed that area to do the plan, they can now do a lot of those plans right from the imagery on their desktop. Here's a Parks and Rec example for asset management, and this is playground equipment. This came from one of our park planners, and they said, you know, when we used to be able to look at the playground equipment on a 3 inch image, excuse me, you know, you can see that playground equipment has some slides and that kind of thing, but you really can't see all the detail about the equipment, and you certainly can't see the condition. Whereas the image on the right gives them a much better picture of the exact equipment that's in place, what the condition of it is. Again, saves them trips from having to go out to that park and assess it firsthand. They can do a lot right from their desktop.
Yeah.
Now we get into some appraisal examples. Our appraiser's office provided all of these. This first one is about AC units. I hadn't thought about this until they brought it up to me. But on the left-hand image, you can generally guess that there's an HVAC, you know, an AC unit there, but it's really, really difficult to see any details about it, let alone its condition. Whereas on the right-hand side, it's very clear what that is, and they can even use that image to tell maybe what year or roughly what time span, how old that might be. So they can do a much more accurate job identifying HVAC equipment. Roof composition, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. The appraisers told me there's a huge difference between 3 inch and 1 inch, that the 1 inch imagery, they can confidently assess roof composition. In the 3 inch imagery, they would have an idea what it was, but they would have to field verify it every time because it just wasn't clear enough to provide that. So you can see this is a more complex roof line, but it's clear what type of roof that is.
Oh, yeah.
Another appraisal example is siding. This one, the two homes here on the left, you can't really tell what kind of siding they have in the 3 inch image. On the 1-inch image, not only can you tell, but one you can tell is vertical and one is horizontal, which per my appraisers, I'm not an appraiser, but they told me that tells them a lot about what type of siding it might be. So they're able to see those actual lines between the siding planks, and that makes a big difference. This is a facility management example where they're looking at rooftop equipment and layout of buildings that they maintain and manage. They're able to see, if there's been any hail damage to some of the equipment. Again, you can roughly see that there are things on the roof on the left, but on the right, you can see much more detail, in terms of condition, age, or if there are any problems. So it's just, again, goes back to that clarity.
Yeah, there seems to be an increased theme of a theme of increased confidence in decision making from the 3-inch to the 1-inch.
That's pretty consistent throughout. That most people said the confidence they have in what they're seeing on the screen and what they believe it is much higher, and high enough a lot of times to eliminate their need for field assessment or minimize their need for field assessment.
Sure.
I've got just some other use cases for public works listed here. Parking meter placement, you can read the list, but the sign inventory, traffic signals, pavement management, condition assessment. I know a big one is stormwater outfall inventory, because those are oftentimes in places that are difficult to get to, and now the imagery, especially with the obliques, is good enough to give them a lot of detail without having to climb down a slippery, steep bank, to try and inventory that. So that's a big one. Here's some other use cases across other departments. Planning uses it quite a bit for code enforcement. Our parks people really were happy about it. They can do park layouts much more effectively with this. There's a cool project we did with the imagery for weed control, noxious weeds, where we were able to classify portions of the imagery and identify them as a certain type of noxious weed. Very, very interesting use case that would have been very difficult to determine from the ground. Go ahead.
Was that within using any sort of color bands in association with the imagery, or just using the imagery?
This was just using the imagery, and there was some kind of spectral analysis just off of the 3-band imagery we did, to say we were looking for areas that had been sprayed for noxious weeds, and we were looking for areas that were missed during those spraying, and the imagery picked those up pretty well. So we've got some good use cases internally of that. Along those same lines, we've used the imagery to build a lot of AI models, deep learning models, to extract features. We just finished a swimming pool extraction across the county. Esri published a big ADA curb ramp inventory that we did off of the 1-inch imagery recently in their public works brief, and that was a cool project. And so there's a lot more that we can extract from that imagery using automated processes. Makes it extra valuable.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned the increased confidence by our appraisal staff and their ability to measure and confirm details. A couple of public safety uses here as well. Our fire department has used the imagery to help identify egress options on the sides of buildings or rooftops where it may not have been as easy to identify before. With the 1-inch imagery, it's made a huge difference. Critical infrastructure inventory, the 911 dispatchers obviously benefit from that increased resolution when they're looking at it. We've also been able to use the 1-inch imagery in some court cases. Example, we used some 1-inch imagery in a murder trial in downtown Omaha this last year, and it's gotten so good, our attorneys have said this is likely going to be something we would ask for more in the future because the quality of the imagery is so good. They can really show those details.
Toward the end, I was going to ask you about maybe some unexpected use cases that you've come across, and that sounds like one, or at least to
That
me,
would,
that's interesting.
yeah, it would definitely be one for sure. So my last few slides are really about our overall assessment of value. I mentioned before I was really looking for use cases from our various departments, and I got testimonials from many users in more than 20 different departments, and I've listed a lot of those departments there, which are very similar to most cities and counties around the country. But the general consensus is that second bullet I have there, the usefulness of the 1-inch imagery is greater than the upcharge cost. Meaning it definitely provides value. So the amount of money we had to pay to upgrade was well worth it, and we think paid for itself early on. And that was universal. Not a single user I talked to didn't believe that the value was there.
Yeah. And this is a good point to dwell on or stay on here for a second because there may be a concern sometimes for folks who don't have your level of experience, who may be new to their roles, procuring these types of technology solutions that can be a significant financial outlay. It's not a one-time transaction, right? You're purchasing imagery that then is used across multiple departments, multiple times, countless times throughout the lifespan of the imagery, and then serves as historical imagery if you do another flight that you can use to compare data sets, and essentially serves as an extension of your team almost, right? Another team member, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point to make. I would say any customer looking to use or acquire this imagery, the most important thing for them to do is make sure their users get this imagery in their hands. Make sure they're prepared to distribute it and get it out to people, because in our findings, the more people who see it, the more they use it. And you don't want to hide it from anyone. You want to make sure everyone's got it available to them, and they'll find the utility from it. And so I think that really helps expand the usage if you can do that.
Yeah. Any quick tips on how you've been successful driving awareness and utilization of imagery throughout the county?
Yeah, I mean, I try to meet with different departments, especially when we go to acquire this imagery, and show examples. I'll have slides more like the last set that I went through that was more pictures than text, and I find that those visuals sell themselves.
Sure.
That when I show them the detail they can see in one image versus a lower resolution image, it typically will help sell the idea to them. And so it's it's important to make sure that people see what you're talking about versus just hear what you're talking about. And the images can do a lot in that respect. As far as the imagery itself is my marketing, so
Sure.
that's what I use. But my last slide, I think, is I got a few slides, just actual testimonials from some of our users that talked about saving time and money. I've got one here from the planning department about bike paths and sidewalks, and then another one from the parks department. I think this was one of our park planners, and they talk about how much time was saved. Here's a couple more, one from our assessor's office, one from our fire department. So I try to get a good cross section, and I was fortunate enough to get some good feedback here. And I know it's a lot of text to read through, but the point is these people really did feel strongly about it. And I think my very last slide is my overall feedback on the product. And I really strongly feel like we made a good decision when we went to the 1-inch imagery, and it's now been paying off for some time. And I think when I look at my role as someone who helps guide the spending of tax dollars on a product like this, I take it very seriously that if we're going to do that, we need to get value out of it. And I think I can sleep pretty easily at night about the expenditure on the 1-inch imagery. It's really paid for itself, and I think it's one of the better taxpayer dollar expenditures that we've made. So
Excellent.
I'm real good about it.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through this information, including the use cases and testimonials regarding prudent use of taxpayer dollars. Obviously, I agree. When this is being recorded in 2023, there's sort of an unprecedented amount of federal funding that's available to counties that may be experiencing budget constraints that may prohibit them from either purchasing imagery or upgrading to a higher resolution through the American Rescue Plan Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Eagle View Solutions are an approved use of American Rescue Plan Act funds under two of the eligible use cases, general government services, or I should say replacement revenue for general government services, and water, sewer, and broadband. So if anyone watching this recorded webinar has ARPA funds remaining, please explore using them for aerial imagery, either to procure it initially or to upgrade to something like 1-inch on account of the benefits. And because it is such a prudent use of those funds that have been provided by the Treasury to communities like Douglas County. But I know you didn't use ARPA funds for this, but if somebody did, it would be a prudent use of those dollars because of how many benefits can be delivered throughout all the departments to members of the community. So it's just something to consider if you're watching at this point. You made it this far.
Yeah, I think I'd say it's much more than a nice to have. It's if you can find the funding for it, this can provide just immense value across the organization, and I think it's a slam dunk.
Yeah, I mean, I know we didn't quantify the actual return, but if you think about, you mentioned time saved, probably doing more with less. From the assessor's point of view, finding additional taxable value on properties when comparing imagery sets, and then safety, right? I don't think we can quantify that, but one of the things that my good friend Kevin McLeod will always say is the most dangerous thing that we do every day is drive. Most of us is drive on roads, and so if you're, I know we said earlier, you can't totally eliminate on-site visits, but if you can reduce on-site visits, then you're looking out for the safety of the employees too. So I really thank you for your time, Mike. We appreciate you. We appreciate your partnership, and thanks for taking the time to prepare all this information. I think it's been really valuable.
Sure.